The Earth's flourishing ecosystem may seem permanent, but they are very much at risk for destruction and collapse. Can you imagine a jungle turning into a desert, or an ocean turning into a lifeless cavern of rocks? This is a real problem that we are facing as a planet, and it may be happening quicker than you realize. Biodiversity, as defined by the National Geographic, refers to all different kinds of living organisms within a given area. This includes plants, animals, fungi, and other living things. Biodiversity can include everything from towering redwood trees to tiny single-celled algae that are impossible to see without a microscope. So what happens when pollution, interruption to these ecosystems, or even deadly events lead to a loss of resources to these organisms? If you thought death or loss of the entire species, you're right. The first time I really became informed about the topic of ecosystem collapse, I was reading about the article on the gray wolves of the Yellowstone National Park. Around the 1930s, Yellowstone National Park was completely free of these predators. We have hunters and the natural fear of these beautiful creatures by our fellow humans to thank for that. Thankfully, scientists discovered that without these wolves, the ecosystem was taking a terribly fast tumble down a steep ravine of extinction. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can getting rid of the big bad wolf truly be a bad thing for us? Well, let me just tell you. Without these wolves in their natural habitat, elk were starting to become the top of the food chain. Where they once would travel to escape from their demise, they grew stagnant and fed for longer periods of time in each area. Eventually, they had eaten all the way down to the rivers. The cottonwood trees, the beavers, and other species started to decline. And this is where the environment became unbalanced, as a trophic cascade took place. Not only were the animal populations declining, but vegetation was scarce, and soil was not being fertilized like it once had from the death of these elk and these deer. Additionally, the rivers were less abundant. Without the beavers creating dams, the animals and small waterfish had nowhere to live. Scientists began to realize what a toll it had taken on the park not to have the gray wolf, which was known as the Yellowstone's keystone species. Robert Payne, a scientist who coined the phrase keystone species in 1964 regarding a starfish population, noted that the presence is crucial in maintaining the organization and diversity of an ecological community. And secondly, it is implicit that these species are exceptional relative to the rest of the community. So what that really means is that the animal, or species for that matter, does not have to be vicious or a bloodsucker. It doesn't have to be a predator to be the keystone species. Instead, the apex predator must be in a position of control, whether directly or indirectly, affecting the fate of its surrounding ecosystem. In fact, when Mr. Payne originally came to the idea about this ecosystem, he was deep sea diving and exploring the ocean ecosystems. There are a number of serious threats that predators face in today's world, not only towards their own extinction, but also in other areas that affect the planet as a whole. Through both declines in the geographic areas that they once inhabited and the number of these species that remain in a concentrated area, there are unwelcome consequences. According to Science magazine, some of the undesirable effects Earth is experiencing include changes to birds, mammals, invertebrate, and herpetofauna abundance, or their richness, subsidies to scavengers, altered disease dynamics, carbon sequestration, and modified stream morphology, not to leave out crop damage. So to illustrate this more clearly for you, the true importance of the keystone species, I've built a model. In the top center, you will find a predator, be it a starfish, elephant, orca, human. In this instance, I used the gray wolf. And coming down on either side, you will find a prey. So elk, eagle, mice, beaver, fish. You will note that without this keystone species, the food web simply falls apart. This is known as ecosystem fragmentation, which means that without this key player, the width of these prey's cozy niche is now at risk for collapse. And without the ability to adapt to different food supplies, it will surely crumble. I have included a web link to the article named Niche Width Collapse and a Resilient Top Predator Following Ecosystem Fragmentation in the handout. If this is something that you find intriguing, as I did, I would encourage you to look further into it. This is an article that specifically touches on the impact of specific regions, and not only with the animal becoming more scarce, but also the lands that these animals used to live on. The main reason this is a topic of concern for not only us, the animals, and the planet is that not all animals are able to shift their food source. Would you be able to? Some animals are. In 1995, the gray wolf was reintroduced back into the Yellowstone National Park. And as you can imagine, there were some astounding changes that took place. According to the European Journal of Wildlife, the reintroduction and recolonization of these wolves decades later has shown a positive effect for tree and shrub recruitment. Additionally, beavers, trees, birds, and rivers became plentiful once again. The recovery of large predators may thus represent an important conservation need for helping to maintain the resiliency of northern forest ecosystems, especially in the face of a rapidly changing climate. So as you can see, each ecosystem on planet Earth is vital for its own individual reason. And even though we as humans may not actively be thinking about it, we too are affected. This decline in the ecosystem is going to change our lives, and possibly even our existence. We cannot ignore it. For me, this is a matter of the greater good. I do not think that I will single-handedly be able to change what is happening on our planet, but by throwing away my trash rather than throwing it out my window, or by encouraging my son to hunt for fish, deer, and fish on public lands, and by educating myself and my peers, I do think that I can contribute to saving our planet. I want my children, my grandchildren, and their children to enjoy animals and nature the same way that I do, and potentially even in a greater manner.